Sarah Thompson, a historian of considerable renown, had spent her life in the pursuit of uncovering long-forgotten stories of the past. Her husband, Mark, often joked that Sarah was more comfortable in dusty archives than in their modern suburban home. They had two beautiful children, Lisa and Jake, aged 10 and 8 respectively. Although Sarah's relentless passion for her work frequently took her away from her family, they understood the significance of her research. When Sarah's latest project required her to travel to a mid-sized city on the East Coast, she decided to book a rental rather than stay in a hotel. After hours of scanning popular booking sites, she stumbled upon a listing for a stylish loft on Airbnb that seemed perfect. Loft 21B was a fusion of vintage brick walls and contemporary furniture, a perfect blend for someone like Sarah who appreciated the past but lived in the present. Sarah's stay started normally enough. The loft was even more beautiful in person. The rich wooden floors creaked underfoot, large factory-style windows let in floods of light, and the modern kitchen gleamed with the promise of fresh brewed coffee. She was welcomed by a handwritten note from the owner, saying they hoped she enjoyed her stay and that they were just a call away if she needed anything. On her second evening, after spending the entire day at a nearby archive, Sarah settled into the loft's cozy living room to watch the local news. As the anchorwoman transitioned to a new segment, a familiar image popped onto the screen, an exterior shot of the very building Sarah was in. In today's feature, we revisit the shocking murder of renowned pianist Anthony Fletcher, who was found brutally murdered in his apartment, Loft 21B. The crime, which occurred a year ago, sent shockwaves through the community. The mystery remains unsolved. Sarah's heart raced. She was sitting in a murder scene. She quickly called the Airbnb host, demanding an explanation. The host apologetically revealed that he had purchased the loft at a reduced rate after the incident and had renovated it. Since the crime, no tenants had reported any disturbances, so he thought it was unnecessary to inform Sarah. He offered her a full refund, but with her tight schedule and the loft's proximity to the archives, Sarah decided to stay, though uneasily. Sarah's research didn't originally involve Anthony Fletcher, but with her historian's intrigue piqued, she found herself delving into his life. Fletcher had been an eccentric. He had a small circle of acquaintances and, bizarrely, was rumored to have a habit of recording his everyday activities on audio tapes. Sarah's historical intrigue overcame her initial fear. She wondered if any of those recordings still existed. The idea of listening to the life of this enigmatic pianist was enticing. The following evening, she came across a concealed door in the loft's walk-in closet. Behind it was a treasure trove of cassette tapes. This was it. These were Fletcher's recordings. She found a tape player in the loft, and with bated breath, she played the first tape. The loft was filled with the soothing sound of a piano, followed by Fletcher's voice documenting his day. It was surreal. Sarah felt as if she were eavesdropping on a moment frozen in time. As days turned into nights, Sarah became consumed. She listened to tape after tape, pulled into the orbit of Anthony's world. She heard the humdrum sounds of his life, his interactions with friends, and most hauntingly, his increasing paranoia. "I feel like someone's watching me," Anthony's voice trembled on one tape. "There are strange noises at night, footsteps when there should be none. I checked, there's never anyone there." On another tape, Sarah could hear Anthony confronting someone. A deep voice responded, "Just mind your business, Fletcher." There was aggression, a threat underlying the tone. Sarah's skin prickled with fear. She found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. One evening, she heard a knock on the loft door. Opening it, she found a man in his early 50s. He introduced himself as Detective Ramirez, the officer assigned to Fletcher's case. He wanted to know if she'd found anything in the loft that could be of interest. Sarah hesitated but then told him about the tapes. The detective's face turned grim. That night, she decided to listen to the last tape. The recording started normally, but soon she heard a disturbance. There was a struggle, a scream, and then a chilling silence. Sarah was paralyzed with horror. The realization hit her. She had just heard the audio recording of Anthony's murder. The next day, Detective Ramirez visited her again. He had a stern look. "Sarah, you need to be careful. We believe Anthony's murderer knew about those tapes. If he thinks there's evidence on them, he might come after you." Terrified, Sarah decided she'd leave the next morning. She packed her bags and tried to rest, but every noise in the night became a potential threat. Sometime past midnight, there was a creak of a floorboard outside her door. Panic welled up inside her. She grabbed her phone to dial 911, but before she could, the door burst open. Detective Ramirez stood there, his face contorted in anger. "You shouldn't have listened to those tapes," he growled. The realization was a cold shock. The detective, the very man she had trusted, was the murderer. In her fear, Sarah lashed out, knocking a lamp onto Ramirez. He staggered, giving her the opportunity to dash for the door. She screamed for help as she ran down the corridors. Security and police soon swarmed the building. Detective Ramirez was apprehended. The tapes had, unknowingly to Sarah, captured his voice, linking him to the murder. Sarah returned home, her research trip cut short. The terror of the experience haunted her dreams. She found herself intertwined with a dark chapter of a stranger's history, and while she escaped with her life, she forever lost her sense of safety. Jake Cameron grew up on the bustling streets of San Francisco, in a high-rise apartment building where the view from his balcony was more skyscrapers. As a kid, he'd always felt like a fish out of water among the corporate suits and business meetings that occupied the streets below. When he discovered surfing at 16, he felt he'd finally found his calling. The ocean waves brought him solace, pulling him farther away from the urban jungle. His family never understood it. His father was a prominent lawyer, his mother a book editor. They had plans for him to follow in their sophisticated footsteps. But Jake, with his sun-bleached hair and an ever-present tan, only ever really felt at home on a board. Now in his 30s, Jake worked as a freelance writer, which gave him the flexibility to surf whenever he wanted and travel wherever the waves took him. He didn't have the responsibilities of a traditional job, a mortgage, or a family to hold him back. Every few months, he'd pick a new exotic location, pack up his things, and chase the perfect wave. This month's choice was a quaint seaside town in Spain, renowned for its beautiful beaches and outstanding waves. Jake had managed to score an amazing deal on a seaside villa on Airbnb. The photos online showcased panoramic ocean views and easy beach access. It was perfect. The villa was more breathtaking in person. Its rustic exterior hid a modern interior with all the conveniences one could want. The balcony provided an uninterrupted view of the vast, shimmering ocean, and the sound of the waves was a constant lullaby. The first few days were heaven. Jake woke up early, had a quick breakfast, and spent hours surfing. In the evenings, he'd cook and enjoy his meal while watching the sunset. It felt like he had found a slice of paradise. It was on the fourth night when things took a turn. Jake returned from a late surf session to find the front door ajar. A chill ran down his spine. He knew he'd locked it before he left. He stepped inside cautiously. The living room looked untouched, but as he moved further into the villa, the once familiar spaces felt eerie. He noticed his laptop, camera, and some cash missing from his bedroom. His mind raced. He had heard stories of local burglars targeting tourists, but he never thought he'd become a victim. He reported the theft to the police, who promised to investigate, but didn't seem too hopeful about recovering his belongings. That night, Jake struggled to sleep. Every little sound, the creak of the wooden floors, the rustle of leaves outside, made him jumpy. He felt exposed, violated. He considered cutting his vacation short, but the thought of letting the burglars win angered him. So he decided to stay, but took extra precautions, like setting up a makeshift alarm using some bottles and string. 2 days passed without incident. Jake's confidence returned. He assumed the thief had moved on to another target. But on the 7th night, as he was watching a movie, he heard a soft thud outside the sliding door that led to the balcony. He muted the TV and strained to listen. Another thud. Gripped by an icy dread, Jake slowly approached the door. He peered outside, but the inky darkness hid any potential threat. He turned on the outside lights, and his heart nearly leaped out of his chest. A man, with a cloth mask concealing his face, was inches away from the glass, his hand raised, ready to strike. Jake stumbled backward, panic seizing him. He bolted to the front door, but to his horror, He found another masked man trying to pick the lock. He was trapped. Adrenaline fueled him. He sprinted to the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest pan he could find. As the man from the balcony slid open the door, Jake swung the pan with all his might, connecting with the intruder's head. The man crumpled to the ground. Without pausing, Jake rushed to the front door, where the second man was now inside. They locked eyes, both assessing each other. With a roar, the masked man lunged at Jake, who swung the pan again. But this time, the man was prepared. He ducked, sending Jake off balance. In seconds, the intruder had him pinned to the ground, a knife gleaming in his hand. But Jake wasn't ready to give up. He kicked and thrashed, managing to knock the knife away. The two wrestled, each trying to gain the upper hand. With one powerful push, Jake sent the man crashing into a shelf. Glass shattered, and the noise was deafening. Suddenly, a shout echoed from outside. "Police! Drop your weapon!" In the ensuing chaos, the second intruder scrambled away, escaping through a window. Jake, panting and covered in bruises, was left in the ransacked living room, surrounded by concerned neighbors and local police. Later, he'd find out that a neighbor had seen the burglars enter the villa and had called the police. The man Jake had knocked out was arrested, but his accomplice remained at large. Jake's vacation turned into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The once idyllic villa now felt like a prison. He packed up and left the very next day, cutting his trip short. Months later, back in San Francisco, he received an email. It contained a picture of the villa, and the message simply read, "Hope you enjoyed your stay." Paul Leighton had always been on the fringe of Hollywood's A-list. Never the lead in blockbusters, but he had played substantial roles in a few critically acclaimed movies. His face was just recognizable enough that a keen fan might stop him on the street for an autograph. It was in pursuit of one such meaty role that he found himself in San Francisco for a week. The audition process required him to stay in the city longer than he'd liked, but he considered it a necessary inconvenience. It was a psychological thriller, the role of a lifetime. Opting for privacy over luxury, Paul rented a modern condo through Airbnb in the Chick-Soma neighborhood. Upon arrival, he was greeted by his host, Graham, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, wearing glasses that seemed to intensify his gaze. "Mr. Leighton, I'm such a fan. Loved you in dark whispers. Welcome to my home," Graham beamed. "Thank you," Paul murmured, trying to hide his surprise. He had hoped for an anonymous trip, free from fan interactions, especially at his temporary residence. The condo was a marvel of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the urban sprawl, minimalist furnishings, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. While settling in, Paul's phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "If you need company, I'm free to join for dinner or sightseeing." Paul hesitated before responding. "Thanks, Graham. Might take a rain check on that. Here mostly for business." He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The next morning, Paul decided to visit the Golden Gate Park. As he exited the building, Graham, as if materializing from the shadows, greeted him. "Fancy seeing you here. Heading out?" Paul, taken aback, nodded. "Just a walk. Thought I'd enjoy the park." "I'll join you," Graham said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not wanting to be impolite, Paul hesitated, then replied, "Sure, why not?" They walked in mostly silence, Graham occasionally pointing out landmarks or trivia about the city. Paul felt Graham's gaze heavy on him, scrutinizing, observing. It was suffocating. Paul tried to evade Graham over the next few days, but it was as if the man had a sixth sense. Coffee at a cafe in the Mission District. Graham was already there, reading a paper, visits at Alcatraz. Graham magically had tickets for the same slot. By the fourth day, Paul's paranoia grew. Was Graham stalking him? He decided to confront him. Paul texted Graham, "Appreciate your company, but would like some time alone. Hope you understand." Minutes later, there was a knock on the condo door. Graham stood there, face red, veins protruding from his neck. "You think you're better than me?" he spat out, voice trembling with rage. Paul stepped back, shocked by this sudden aggression. "No, Graham, I just need some privacy." You rent my home, eat in my city, and then want me gone? Ungrateful. With that, Graham stormed off, leaving Paul shaken. Paul's audition was the next day. He decided he'd check into a hotel after and avoid any further contact with Graham. But the next day, when Paul returned from the audition, he found his belongings strewn across the condo. His passport gone. His phone smashed. A note lay on the coffee table. No one rejects Graham. Terrified, Paul raced to the nearest police station. They took his statement and sent an officer to the condo. Graham was gone. Paul was advised to leave the city and they'd handle the matter. That night, Paul checked into a hotel downtown, using an alias. The weight on his chest seemed to lift a little. Maybe he had overreacted. Maybe Graham was just a disgruntled, lonely man, and it was all a misunderstanding. Around midnight, while drifting into sleep, Paul's room phone rang. Groggy, he answered. There was a moment of silence, then the unmistakable voice sent chills down Paul's spine. You can't hide from me, Paul. Paul panicked. He grabbed a few essentials and fled the hotel. He rented a car, intending to drive to the A and escape the nightmare. As he sped down the highway, Paul's eyes darted around, expecting Graham at every turn. Paranoia had taken hold. Every car seemed to be tailing him, every shadow a lurking menace. Hours into the drive, his tired eyes caught a glint in the rearview mirror. A car, its headlights off, was tailing him closely. Paul's heart raced. He floored the accelerator, the roads a blur, the dark silhouette of the pursuer relentless. A sharp bend approached. Paul, in his exhaustion and panic, miscalculated. Tires screeched. Metal screamed. The world turned upside down. Morning light revealed a wrecked car in a ditch. Locals who arrived on the scene found Paul, unconscious but alive. There was no sign of any other vehicle. The news about Paul's accident spread. The investigation showed that there was no evidence of another car or foul play. It was deemed an unfortunate accident due to exhaustion. Weeks later, as Paul recuperated in a hospital in Leighton, a bouquet arrived with a note. Get well soon, dear Paul. We had fun in San Francisco, didn't we? Graham. The truth of that night on the highway remained a mystery. Had Graham really been there, or had paranoia and fear conjured an imaginary pursuer? Paul never returned to San Francisco. But every shadow, every unexpected phone call, every knock at the door kept the memory and fear of Graham alive. In the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, Paul Leighton had faced many foes on screen, but none would ever be as terrifying as the specter of Graham, the silent observer,